Wood. Not exactly poetic, is it? But that's where it all began. A silent piece of wood waiting to become a voice. If I could speak, I wouldn't begin with music, but with stillness, with the quiet that comes before life. I am the violin of forgotten songs, and this is my story. If I could speak, I would begin here, not with music, not with applause, but with the quiet, with the slow hush of sawdust falling through golden light, the way it drifted, gently, like snow that never touched the ground. You wouldn't have noticed me yet. I wasn't quite myself, just curves of maple, a hollow shell, tucked between wooden clamps. I was waiting, not sad, just still. There was a man with careful hands. He didn't talk much, only hummed sometimes, a sound like warm soup or old lullabies. His workshop smelled of cedar, wax, and something sweet I still can't name. Maybe it was time, or memory, or varnish drying slowly in the corners. He shaped me with patience, with quiet. Each scrape of his blade was a word without sound. I remember the feel of his thumb pressing along my neck, not cold, not warm, just there, as if saying, "You are real now." Outside, there was always the soft tapping of horse hooves in the cobbled street, and pigeons cooing from the rooftop tiles. And sometimes rain, the thin kind that laced through window cracks and made the wood swell with sleepy sighs. The man lit his lamp each evening as the sky turned plum-colored. He would run his fingers along my spine, checking for balance. And I would listen, not to notes, not yet, but to the way the silence settled between us, as if we were both waiting for something that didn't need to come quickly. The first time I was strung, I held my breath. Strings are strange things. They stretch, they hum, they ask you to carry things you don't understand, longing mostly. He touched the bow to me, lightly, so lightly. It wasn't a song. It was a question, drawn slow across my belly, a trembling whisper, like someone calling from very far away. I don't remember if it was beautiful, only that it was the first time I heard myself, and that I wasn't alone. Later, he placed me in a case lined with red velvet. It was soft, like sleep, like a cloud that didn't move. He tucked a folded cloth beside me, closed the latches, carried me under his arm, through the early morning mist. I don't remember where we went next, only the feeling of motion, gentle, swaying, like a cradle, and the faint warmth of the rising sun brushing through the cracks in my case, golden and slow, like the beginning of something I couldn't name, but was ready to follow. If I could speak, I would tell you that my first memory is not of being played, but of being made with care. And care, I think, is its own kind of music. Next, I will tell you about her fingers. They were small and full of rain, but that is a quieter story still. If I could speak, I would tell you about her, Anna. Her name was never carved into me, but I felt it in the way she held me, as if I were something delicate but not breakable, as if I were something she needed to listen to with her whole self. She was very young when I met her, perhaps 8, maybe 9. Her hands were small, and her touch, nervous at first, like rain tapping on a window, unsure if it should come in. She wore a ribbon in her hair, sometimes red, sometimes pale blue, and she always smelled faintly of flour and ink and the soft dust from old carpets. Her room was on the second floor of a quiet house tucked near a bakery in Vienna. Each morning, the scent of bread would rise through the shutters, warm, golden. It clung to the curtains and to her sleeves. There was a clock in the hallway that chimed every hour, but it always felt slow, like it too was listening. Birds nested on the windowsill, and sometimes they would sing along, off-key but sincere. She would open my case with 2 hands, always both, gently, as though I might startle if she came too quickly. And when she lifted me to her shoulder, I felt her heart against my back, not strong or steady, but fluttering like pages in a breeze. The first notes were halting, crooked. They wobbled through the room like toddlers learning to walk. But oh, how she tried. Day after day she tried. And the more she tried, the more I began to know her. Her fingers grew braver, less shy. She learned how to coax sweetness from my strings, how to guide the bow like a soft river over my ribs. She played scales and exercises and little songs from her lesson book. But most of all, she played a melody that was not written down. It was slow and sad and simple. Just 6 notes, repeated again and again, like a lullaby that had forgotten its ending. She never spoke while she played it, not even a hum. But something in her breathing told me it was important. Something passed down, perhaps, a tune her mother once sang in the quiet. Evenings were my favorite. The lamp on her desk flickered softly, casting gold shadows on the wallpaper, and Anna would sit cross-legged on the rug, her dress pooling around her like spilled milk. She didn't always play. Sometimes she just held me, ran her thumb along my scroll, tuned a string and let it ring into the silence. Those were the moments I felt most alive. Not when I was loud, but when I was still. And she was still, and we were both listening to nothing together. I never knew what she was thinking, only that she needed me. Not as something perfect, not as something proud, just as something that stayed. Eventually, the playing grew softer. Days passed without the sound of her bow, but that is not a story of sadness. Not yet. Only of quiet. And quiet, too, can be a kind of music. If I could speak, I would tell you, she gave me her silence as a gift. And in that silence, I learned how to remember. Next, I will tell you about the attic, where dust fell like snowflakes, and I began to forget the sound of my own voice. If I could speak, I would tell you how silence grew. Not suddenly, not like a door closing, but slowly, like fog rising in a field at dawn, soft and sure, until you forget what the world looked like before it came. I don't remember the moment I was placed in the trunk, only the feeling of being wrapped in something warm, an old blanket, perhaps, and the faint scent of lavender and thyme. Hands set me down gently. The lid closed with a quiet thump. Then nothing. Not absence, just nothing. Above me, the house sighed. I could hear the wooden beams stretch in the mornings, like an old man waking. Floorboards creaked, but no footsteps came. Only the occasional flutter of pigeons nesting near the chimney. The air grew still. heavy with dust that moved like tiny stars in the dark. Sometimes, light would spill through the attic slats, long golden lines that danced across the floor. I never reached them, but I watched them come and go. Seasons passed the way breath does, in and out, with no announcement. In winter, the wind would hum through the roof tiles, and I would imagine Anna's lullaby floating somewhere in it, a faint echo rising with the snow. In summer, the heat wrapped around the trunk like a blanket left too long in the sun. The attic smelled of old paper and cedar and forgotten Christmas decorations. A quiet museum with no visitors. I was not lonely, only quiet. Quiet in the way a closed book is quiet, full of things but not opened, not asked. Sometimes I dreamed of sound, not music, just simple things. A voice humming from another room, the rustle of sleeves, the soft squeak of rosin against string. But the longer I stayed, the more my dreams faded, not in sadness, but in gentleness, as if time were brushing me with a soft cloth, polishing me into forgetfulness. I began to forget the weight of her hands, the pressure of the bow, the feel of being lifted into air. But I remembered light, the golden kind that slips through attic windows in late afternoon, the kind that turns dust into stars and silence into something sacred. If I could speak, I would tell you that waiting is not wasted time, that stillness can be a kind of listening, that I did not need to be played to still feel full. Next, I will tell you about the hands that did not listen. They came one day and carried me away, but the attic stayed with me. If I could speak, I would tell you, not every hand is gentle. Not every sound is music. The trunk opened after many years. I felt the hinges groan, dry and surprised. And then light, harsh, hurried morning light. A hand reached in, not curious, not kind, just a hand doing a job. The attic air was traded for a colder kind of silence, the silence of moving trucks and broom-swept floors, of empty rooms and forgotten corners. Soon I was resting on a metal shelf beneath buzzing lights, between chipped furniture and broken radios, in a pawn shop that smelled faintly of old coffee and rain-wet shoes. The case creaked when opened now. My velvet lining had faded. I had not been tuned. But still, someone came. He didn't smile when he picked me up. His fingers were strong, but not careful. He tapped on my ribs with his knuckles, as if listening for something, not a note, but a deal. I remembered the bell above the shop door as he left with me. A little jingle, thin and hopeful. It didn't last long. I lived then in a room that never stayed still. Clocks blinked red, windows rattled. There was always a hum of a fridge or a record player or voices from the apartment above. He played me sometimes, not softly. He dragged the bow hard across my strings. He wanted noise, fast, loud, leaning forward. I gave what I could, but it wasn't much. I was cracked a little, just a thin line beneath the bridge. It ached, in a quiet way. The kind of ache you carry, not the kind you name. There were nights he left me leaning in a corner, still strung, still stretched. And once I fell, not far, but far enough to feel it deep inside. He never noticed. Sometimes I'd listen to the city through the window. Car horns in the distance, footsteps on the stairs, a dog barking once, then gone. Those sounds made more sense to me than the ones I made now. I remember one evening, late. He opened my case, looked at me, then closed it again. That was the last time he touched me. From then on, I lived in a closet. Dark, still. Boxes pressed around me, a winter coat slumped on my side, and the smell of mothballs and something sour, like forgotten apples. Time passed in shadows. Not cruel ones, just quiet. I did not miss being played, but I missed being heard. If I could speak, I would tell you, there is a difference between making sound and being listened to. Next, I will tell you about a boy. He didn't know how to play, but he listened with his whole heart. If I could speak, I would tell you, there are hands that do not know what they're doing, but still carry kindness. It was a bright morning when I left the closet. Dust clung to me like a thin veil, and the latch on my case creaked softly, like an old knee. I don't remember how I ended up in the thrift shop, only the stillness of the shelf and the way the sunlight slanted through the smudged front windows. It painted quiet stripes across my case, pale gold and sleepy. There were other things around me, a chipped vase, some teacups, a pile of wrinkled scarves that still smelled faintly of perfume. I waited. And then, a boy. He was young, perhaps 15, a little unsure in his limbs, like he hadn't grown into them yet. He had soft eyes, quiet shoes. He opened my case with 2 hands, not because I was delicate, but because he was. He didn't say anything, just looked at me for a long time, as if listening without ears. And I tried to remember how to hum for him. He bought me with coins, some paper money too, folded in a square. At home, his room was small. The walls were pale blue, with posters taped unevenly. There was a desk beneath the window, and a cup with pencils, and a bed that was rarely made. He cleaned me with a shirt sleeve, not expertly, just gently. He didn't know how to play, but he tried. Oh, how he tried. His bow was too loose. His fingers stumbled, unsure of the spaces. The strings groaned and whined at first, but beneath the noise, I could feel something true. He wanted to understand. In the evenings, he would sit cross-legged on the floor, his back resting against the bed frame, and he would place me on his shoulder like a promise. The notes were messy, but the silence between them was full of hope. He didn't play me every day. Sometimes life pulled at his sleeves, school or phones or heavy thoughts. But he never left me for long, not at first. I remember mornings when the window was open, and the breeze would carry in the scent of grass and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, and he would play just one note over and over again, not to get it right, but because he liked the way it sounded. That note stayed with me. He grew, as they all do. He grew busier, quieter. The case stayed closed longer. And then one day, he packed a box and placed me on a shelf just for now. He stood there for a moment, his eyes on my case, and he smiled, small and tired, the way someone smiles at something they're not sure how to say goodbye to. Then he turned out the light, and I was alone again, but not empty. If I could speak, I would tell you, you do not need to be played perfectly to be loved. Next, I will tell you about the stillness, the kind that comes after the music has faded, the kind that feels like the end, but isn't. If I could speak, I would tell you, some endings are not endings at all. They are only softer beginnings. The attic is different this time. It smells of old wood and insulation, cardboard boxes filled with winter clothes, and stacks of books with yellowing pages. A single window lets in the light. It comes in sideways, slow, warm, golden, and rests across the floor like a tired animal. No one has opened my case in years. I sit on a shelf, tucked behind a quilt, beneath a plastic tub of Christmas lights that never seem to get untangled. And I listen. To dust as it settles in quiet little flurries. To the creaking of the house as it breathes. To the wind outside, brushing against the roof like an old lullaby trying to find its way back. No voices, no music, only the hush that fills the corners of forgotten places. And it is not sad. It is the kind of silence that asks nothing of you, that lets you rest, that keeps your memories folded like linens, neatly tucked in the drawers of your ribs. Sometimes I remember Anna's fingers, or the boy's one perfect note, or the humming of the man who carved me. But now those memories come not as longing, just as visitors, drifting in like leaves through an open window, staying a while, then going. Time no longer passes here. It drifts, like music with no tempo, like sleep. And I have become something else. Not a violin, not quite. More like a vessel. A hollow place where memories echo softly, where silence wears velvet, and where the past curls up to rest. If I could speak, I would whisper this. I was not made only to be played. I was made to hold sound. And now I hold silence. And silence, too, can be full. So if you ever find me, dusty, quiet, resting beneath rafters, don't wake me too quickly. Just sit near me for a while, and I will remember with you. End of story. You may sleep now. The song has finished, but the echo is yours to keep.